Hey vinyl community, Mark from Sound Matters here again with another video, and today we're talking record weights and clamps. Do these actually make a difference, or are they just a load of old snake oil for pretentious audiophiles that would have us believe they can actually hear the difference? We're going to answer that question as diplomatically as possible today. So record weights such as this one that I have in my hand, and clamps, ones that you actually screw down on top of the spindle, they sit on top of the record label and they slot onto the spindle, and they either add weight such as this one here that I have in my hand, or they are a way of tightening and fastening the record to the platter surface, and they're said to add stabilisation to the performance of the record and help tighten and focus the sound. However, critics of these methods of optimizing your hi-fi setup claim that they can add unnecessary strain on belts and bearings for what is very, very little sonic benefit. So I just want to open up the discussion. It does divide opinion among the hi-fi world, but we're going to talk about the kind of possible pros and possible cons, and then I'm going to let you know what I think by the end of this video. So how do record weights and clamps actually work? Well, quite simply, a record weight adds mass to the disc, while a clamp adds additional force. The idea, of course, is to improve contact between the disc and the platter to prevent slipping, improve tracking performance, and help control resonance. In the case of warped records, they can be absolutely necessary to make the disc playable. So if we really think about the physical process of playing a record, it happens on a very microscopic level, and so any vibrations that reach the stylus and ultimately get back into the playback system will result in an audible signal. So the trick is to keep those unwanted vibrations away, allowing the stylus to focus on its job at hand. Even the physical process of reading the grooves can cause a small amount of vibration energy that can make its way back into the stylus and ultimately the audio system as unwanted interference and noise. So securing the record to the platter helps minimize these vibrations and helps the record become easier to track. So the result, in theory, is a tighter, more focused sound across the frequency spectrum. But if the proposed benefits of improving the contact between the record and the platter don't convince you that this can improve the performance of the playback system, then talking about the potential for the disc slipping and slipping prevention might have you convinced as to some of the benefits of having a record weight or a clamp. So as the platter spins, there is always potential for the record to slip, and depending on how your turntable platter mat is set up and how tightly the record fits to the spindle, this may or may not be an issue. However, if the record moves, you will certainly experience a change in pitch. So by adding a weight or a clamp to the record, you can significantly reduce the risk of this happening. So this is very closely related to the issue of sort of wow and flutter, and one of the other things that people claim is that adding a weight or a clamp to your turntable can reduce wow and flutter by improving the speed stability. So you add additional mass, and this makes the record spin at a more consistent speed in theory. So while this claim is credible, any improvements are likely to be quite subtle though. But what about warped records? Well, we touched on this briefly already, but there is the potential, and this is a good case for at least owning one clamp or one weight as part of your accessories arsenal, if you like, in terms of being a record collector, is that it can help improve the playback performance of mildly warped records within reason. So you add a little weight or you clamp the disc down, you can potentially flatten out a mildly warped record and improve the performance of the tracking, make it easier for the stylus to track the surface of that record. However, of course, there are limits to this, and if your record is warped to bits, then there's no way that a record or clamp is going to fix that What about some of the potential downsides to this? And there are very valid concerns when it comes to weights and clamps. So the potential weight and strain on the belt and the bearings of the turntable, your motor, these are issues that certainly shouldn't be just ignored. And it's advisable, I would say, to avoid record weights and clamps on many cheaper record players and turntables. If this is at all concerning you, then I recommend that you check with the manufacturer first before adding anything to the playback system. In particular, as well, if your turntable, and this is more expensive systems we're talking about here though, if it has a suspension system, then you absolutely must check that the system can support the additional weight. In some instances, you may have to actually retune the suspension system to support that additional weight. Now, record weights and clamps also come in very varyingly different weights and mass, right? So my personal preference is to go for a fairly moderate weight that adds some downward pressure without risking unnecessary force. Some of them can get very, very heavy indeed, and then I do start to get a little bit concerned about the additional strain. So do they make a difference? Should you get a weight or a clamp? I do own a weight. I own a couple of weights, in fact, including the one that you can see spinning on the record at the moment. I'll put a link in the description below. It's a groove washer one. It's pretty modestly weighted. It's not overly heavy. I quite like this one, but you can go check that out in the link in the description below for yourself. Now, I do use the record weight from time to time. I don't use it every time I play a record, as quite frankly, life is kind of too short, but what I do use it for is more critical kind of listening sessions when I'm really sitting down and losing myself in the music. If I'm playing records more casually, I don't tend to bother adding the extra weight. So should you get one for yourself? Well, you know, it's up to you. I recommend you give it a try. They're not particularly expensive to buy, and you can see for yourself as to whether you think it adds any improvement at all. I think it does. I think it tightens and focuses the sound, but what I would say is that the difference is quite subtle. If you're expecting complete and utter sonic nirvana and for it to transform your listening experience by adding this weight, you're likely to be disappointed. And I would recommend that you spend more of your budget first of all in upgrading, say, maybe the cartridge or the turntable itself or any other aspect of your hi-fi system. This is more kind of optimization as opposed to revolution in terms of the improvement that I can hear in the performance. But I do believe personally, as a listener, my personal opinion is it does make some difference. It optimizes things just that little bit, and it's very, very good, particularly when listening on headphones. You hear a slightly tighter, more focused sound in my experience. So just a final little quick note on clamps before we wrap up here. But you know, one of the said benefits potentially to clamps is that they can be slightly less weighty than, you know, obviously weights. You know, some of the weights actually get pretty heavy, and that obviously concerns people, as we've already touched on. But if this is a concern for you, then a clamp might be a better way to go. The downside, and the reason I don't use a clamp, is that they're just a bit of a faff to take on and off, and it's up to you. Everyone's different, but for me it's just too much hassle to screw on and screw off every time I want to either flip the record or change the record to another one. So that pretty much concludes today's topic. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Record weights and clamps. Do you use one? Do you think it makes a difference? Do you think it's a load of old nonsense? I want to hear from you down in the comment section of this video. And if you're new to the channel here, do consider subscribing. And if you've enjoyed this content, give it a thumbs up, and we will see you in the next video.